I'd like to thank Pete and Melanie and Hannah for allowing me to talk about one of my favorite subjects, which is the furniture of William Penhallow Henderson and his Pueblo-Spanish building company. It's funny that you should refer to me as a polymath because Paul Weidman referred to Henderson as a polymath and a Renaissance man in an essay that he wrote for Historic Santa Fe Foundation in 2007. Oh, is it on? Here we go. So I first became interested in William Penhallow Henderson in 1986 when I encountered this painting at Nat Owings Gallery. The title of this painting is Madonna of the Junipers, and there are several things about it that are applicable to the discussion today. Not particularly so, perhaps, is Henderson's palette, which took him a few years to arrive at after he came to Santa Fe. But you can see that it is an amazingly beautiful palette. In fact, he's been called the Santa Fe colorist. I think of more import is the his use of the diagonal in his artwork and his furniture. And it's pretty easy to see the diagonal that falls from the upper left-hand corner down to the lower right-hand corner. And then the next thing that I thought was pretty interesting about this painting, it took me years to figure out, is Henderson's use of symbolism in this painting. He was a huge fan of Puvis de Chavannes, who was the founder of the French symbolist school, and who Henderson ran into during his time in Europe as a student. And in this painting, it's called, of course, a Madonna painting. So there's a mother and a child. What you don't really notice so much is this Oya, which is sort of a typical Pueblo Oya of Henderson's time. It's painted in black and white on a red slip. But if you look closely, there is the Henderson rose. And he's used that rose design to serve as, it's everywhere here. So to use as a halo over the Christ child's head. So you'll see this not only in his furniture and artwork, but also in his architecture. Henderson was born in 1877 in Medford, Massachusetts. He was the son of William Oliver Henderson and Sally Auguste Legal. Henderson's father was from a long line of seamen. He was a sea captain, and he retired from his seafaring life about the time that Henderson was born. He took part in several business adventures which were only modestly successful. Early on, Henderson had some interest in going to sea, but William Oliver had him read Richard Henry Dana's 2 Years Before the Mast. And if you've read it, you'd know why he became an artist instead. So the Hendersons moved to Turkey Creek, Texas in 1879. So it's a couple of years after he was born. He actually spent 6 years there. So the early formative years of his life were actually in Texas. For us today, it's irrelevant because this was the time frame when Henderson first visited Santa Fe. He traveled by wagon train, military wagon train from Uvalde, Texas to Santa Fe with his mother. And later in life, he'd recall his time in Santa Fe on this trip. In 1886, the family moved to Clinton, Kansas, where his dad was president of a bank for 5 years. And then finally, in 1891, the family returns to Medford for Henderson to complete high school. He was interested not only in art, but also in military training. He took part in football and track and field. In fact, when he graduated, he had several records in high jump and something else. He soon after graduation from high school, enrolled at the Massachusetts Normal Art School. He was there only a brief period of time, but while he was there, he studied art and engineering, and it was the engineering courses that he took there, I think, that served him well later in his architecture career. He enrolled in 1899 at the Boston Museum of Fine Arts School, the Museum School. He spent 3 years there before graduating. While he was there, he won a number of awards, student awards, and when he graduated in 1901, he received the Page Traveling Scholarship, which provided him with 2 years of travel and study in Europe. He's left diaries of his time on this scholarship trip, which are really interesting and actually very lovely. Um, while he was in Europe, he became very good friends with Alden Twatchman, who was the son of John Twatchman, one of the early American Impressionists. He was also very good friends with Emily Sargent, who was the sister of John Singer Sargent. Um, and I always have thought that his early exposure to the pastels of John Singer Sargent led to him becoming so facile with use of pastels. Um, he returned to the U.S. in 1904 and almost immediately took a teaching position at the Academy of Fine Arts in Chicago. This is not to be confused with the School at the Art Institute. The Academy of Fine Arts had been founded by an artist who was quite an entrepreneur and very charismatic by the name of Karl Wernst. Soon after his arrival at the school, he and Wernst traveled into Mexico and Arizona. He completed a number of pastels and ink sketches during this trip. And this is one of the pastels that he created. It's a street scene in Mexico, obviously. And you can see this amazingly beautiful palette that he used. In 1905, he met and married Alice Corbin. Alice Corbin was a young literary critic, a poet, and eventually co-founder of Poetry Magazine with Harriet Monroe. In this pastel drawing, we can see Alice Corbin in the foreground, and behind her is Harriet Monroe. So these are the two founders of Poetry Magazine, which still exists today. Henderson and Alice Corbin became very involved with the creative class in Chicago. He not only taught his 300 students a week at the academy, he also was active in painting murals around Chicago. He created set designs for a theater company in Chicago. And perhaps most importantly, he was a very sought-after portrait painter. So in 1911, he illustrated Alice Corbin's translation of Andersen's best fairy tales. And with the proceeds from this book, the Hendersons traveled to Europe for a year. They were accompanied by their young daughter, little Alice, or Alice Oliver. And while he was there, he obviously created a number of pastels and oil sketches as well. This is a Holy Week scene in Sevilla that he created at this time. In 1912 and through 1913, he designed and created a home at Lake Bluff near Chicago. This, as you can see, is pretty is structured certainly on the Prairie School and also a bit of European modernism thrown in. The house still exists today, and it's called the Pink Palace, which you can't see in this photograph. It's actually pink. The most important thing that happened during this period of time for his later career was his taking part in creating murals for Frank Lloyd Wright's Midway Gardens. And I'm sorry, this is a little bit out of focus, but he and John Norton, a fellow Chicago artist, were hired to complete murals for Frank Lloyd Wright in several of the rooms. He spent almost 2 years working on these murals. And just as they were about to be completed, he had a run-in with Wright, and he was either fired or he quit. But the final outcome was that Wright plastered over all of the murals, not only of Henderson, but John Norton as well. Well, this, of course, was a financial disaster for Henderson. He was never paid for this project, and it was actually a worse calamity for Alice Corbin, because what was thought to be a severe case of pleurisy ended up being advanced pulmonary tuberculosis. These are some pastel drawings that he completed for planning the murals that he did for Henderson. And you can see they're a little more architectonic than you would think of Henderson. But there's a couple of things to point out in these. One, of course, is his reliance on the diagonal. He started this at the Midway Gardens, and he continued to use the diagonal in planning his drawings for the rest of his life. This is another one of the sketches that he did. And this one is really interesting, I think, because of the proportion. He was a huge fan of dynamic symmetry and use of the golden mean. And this is a perfect example of this. If you create oops, let me go back here. If you look at the ratio of the width to the height, it's 1.63. It's exactly the golden mean. So Alice Corbin, with the horrible diagnosis, prognosis was that she would live less than a year. They abruptly uprooted their life in Chicago and moved to Santa Fe. In 1916, they arrived in Santa Fe at Lamy. It was the early springtime. In the evening, they spent the night at the El Ortiz Hotel, which is no longer in Lamy. They then traveled by a wagon from the El Ortiz to Dr. Mera's office, which was in Sana Plaza. And the diagnosis of advanced pulmonary tuberculosis was confirmed, and she was admitted to Sunmont Sanatorium, where she spent a year recuperating and gaining her health back. This is a pen and ink drawing, one of a series of drawings that Henderson did of Sunmont. And you can see the sanatorium here, and of course, Sun Mountain behind. Well, Henderson and Alice Corbin adapted pretty quickly to their life in Santa Fe. You can see that they took on local clothing. They got around mainly on horseback, and they quickly became part of the intellectual circle here in Santa Fe. No, I don't think so. I think they're just looking backward. I looked at that also. In 1916, Henderson, well, actually, that's incorrect. In 1919, Henderson built his studio at 557 Camino del Monte Sol. And in this photograph, you can see this is a studio over here on the right. And this is the new home in 1923 under construction. And if you look at it, it's sort of a typical New Mexico adobe. It has a stone foundation. The adobe, of course, placed on top of this. Large wooden lintels for the windows, the vigas extending beyond the surface of the adobe, and everything capped with a parapet. But if you look a little more, oh, here we are. Here's the house after it's completed. If you look a little bit closer, Henderson was more of a progressive architect than someone like John Gamin, who was more classically trained. This is a Henderson corbel, and I think it's interesting. The corbel here is not this corbel, but he used this particular corbel in most of his drawings, or in most of his homes. And if you look at it, he's used once again, the golden mean to come up with the spiral design, and the spirals were used at either end of the corbel. This is a photograph of the Henderson living room. It's a little bit difficult to see, but one of the things you can, go back here. One of the things you can see is Madonna the junipers right here, which retained in the family's hands until 1986. What is there to note about this? It does show the Henderson corbels. He's used squared beams rather than vigas for the ceiling. You can see he has exposed lintels, which is more of an affectation of the Santa Fe style than truly vernacular style. He's used a little patercito wall here to separate the fireplace from this doorway. And one of the interesting things about the fireplace is that it's recessed into the wall. And this was a fireplace design that John Gamin would use later in several of the homes that he designed. What I really wanted to show you, however, is the furniture. You can see a little Spanish chair, and then two armchairs, a little bitty stool, which is sort of in the Spanish style, which he called a banquito. And over by the fireplace is a little bitty firewood box that, interestingly, for a number of years when I came to Santa Fe, was thought to be a book stand, but it's not. This is out of place, but I wanted to show this because this is furniture that Henderson created for this house. This is furniture that was created for the Edwin Brooks House. And you can see that there are twin beds over on the left. There's a lounge chair on the right. In front of it is what he called the low table, which we call a coffee table nowadays. Little banquito, a small side chair, and I think another little side table here over on the side. But one of the things that stands out most prominently when you look at this furniture is that every surface has this diagonal hand-add surface, which he created with a draw knife. It's not with actually a hand adze. So in 1925, he began a big project for the White Sisters. It became known as El Delirio. It, of course, now is the campus of the School of Advanced Research on Garcia. This is the main house that the White Sisters lived in. It's based, of course, on a New Mexico mission design. This porch has been closed in as a sunroom, which is one of the things Meme became sort of known for. But if you've ever been there, it's a giant campus. And Henderson designed a great deal of those buildings. It took him 5 years to complete. So I'm going to step back just a little bit in time. In 1922, an unexpected occurrence occurred. And this was the marriage of Alice Oliver to John Evans. John Evans was the only child of Mabel Dodge Lujan. And of course, little Alice was the only child of the Hendersons. And they were married in 1922. John Evans was 20 years old. He had just dropped out of Yale. And little Alice wasn't quite 16. But regardless of that, they were married and they were off to Europe for several months of a honeymoon. So this marriage would have a great impact on Henderson, both at the time and later on in his life, particularly. When the Evans returned from Europe, John Evans developed a company that he called the Flying Hearts Development Company. That was really meant to do a bunch of different things like mining and construction and engineering. In actual matter of fact, pretty much the only thing that it did was this house. This house was built on a lot that was owned by John Baca, who of course owned El Zaguán. When John Evans purchased the lot, it actually had several buildings on it. And some people believe that some of those buildings or some of that structure was incorporated into this building, but I really don't think so. So this is their great project. And it was, if you look at it, it's a great example of the eccentricities of Henderson's designs. For instance, you can see, I don't know if you can see it from here, but the carve on the base of the railing up above is very asymmetric. You can see that he's used the Henderson rose everywhere. I mean, there's this funny extension of this out into the room. Yeah, there's the rose. One of the great things that he did, I think, was the radiator covers. And he would have argued that he created those to break up the horizontal design of the vernacular New Mexico house and add in a vertical element to it. This is a drawing that he completed for an advertisement at the time. Here up above, you can see El Delirio. And what I want to point out is this table. This is the Edwin Brooks dining room table. And I'm not sure where the dining room table would have sat here, but I don't see how it could have possibly fit in here. So this is a photograph of Henderson in front of his studio and workshop. Over on the far left is Edwin Brooks, who owned a small interest in Henderson's company, then Henderson, and then the four men that worked in the workshop. And I believe that this is Gregorio Gabaldon, who served as the shop foreman at the time. So this is a 1926 project that he completed for Robert Hunter Clarkson of the Fred Harvey Company. This is the Santa Fe ticket office. A lot of people call this Pueblo Deco, but whatever it's called, Henderson created this, and this style of building, which I think was really actually pretty popular in the 80s here in Santa Fe, started with this Santa Fe ticket office. He created not only the furniture, but all the paintings as well, the light fixtures, and you can see, here's a little Henderson corbel. Um, this is a real interesting project that Henderson created, and it went on for almost 10 years. In 1929, he was invited to submit a design for the Rockefeller-sponsored Laboratory of Anthropology. He, of course, did not win. John Gamin won the competition, and this, of course, is the Laboratory of Anthropology building that's there today. And this is where MIAC sits now, but this is a rendering of Henderson's that shows this very odd eight-sided building, which would eventually become the Wheelwright Museum. Discussions went on for year after year after year about this building that was called Building B. That would be the second building on the Laboratory of Anthropology campus. Sylvanus Morley was absolutely dead set that he would not allow an eight-sided building next to a Pueblo-Spanish revival style structure that Meme had built. So it was never built there. Instead, it was built over here on the right-hand side. It was donated by the White Sisters, and the funding for this was by Mary Wheelwright. This is the building soon after it was completed. It was known as the House of Navajo Religion. And it indeed is very eight-sided. It's very angular, and it's based on the design of a Pueblo hogan. Inside, it had this huge cribbed ceiling. These are sand painting paintings, or actually they're copies of sand paintings that Henderson did for the museum. They were oil on, what do they call it, buckboard. But he created dozens and dozens of these. And in the 70s, they were repatriated to the Navajo Nation, and I guess they're just gone. There is one real sand painting here in the foreground, and really what I want to point out about this is not the sand painting, but the box that it sits in. And you can see, just like his furniture, it's adds over the complete surface. This is Henderson with Hostine Claw, who Henderson became a great friend with. He, of course, was important in working with Mary Wheelwright in documenting and recording a number of the Navajo chants for ceremonies. He believed that the Navajo religion was about to completely disappear, so he worked with Henderson in creating all those dozens of sand paintings that Henderson painted for the museum. So this is a really interesting space. This is the basement of the Wheelwright Museum, and this space still exists now. It's been infilled with offices and whatnot, but it's filled in this photograph with Henderson furniture. Well, it's filled because the Hendersons moved into this space, and they moved into it really because of his early relationship with John Evans. So John Evans has been said by some to have been one of the owners of the Pueblo-Spanish building company that Henderson founded for his various projects, but he was not. Henderson did, however, design and build the Evans home in Tasuki, and he signed for the banknote for the construction of this building. As I said, little Alice and John Evans were married in 1922. Well, they were divorced in 1933, and soon after the divorce, he filed for bankruptcy. And it took several years for this to go through the courts, but when it was eventually settled in the late 1930s, Henderson was left responsible for this loan, and he in turn went bankrupt himself. He lost the home, or he and Alice lost the home on Camino del Monte Sol, and this is where they ended up, the basement of the Wheelwright Museum. Henderson, as I said at this time, was creating these dozens of paintings for the museum, and Alice Corbin served as the first curator for the museum. There's a few things that are interesting about this photograph. One is this giant textile over here on the side. But for our purposes today, this is the original Henderson dining room table, and this was the impetus for Henderson to start building furniture. And behind it is another really interesting piece of furniture. This is the Henderson's Davenport that sat in their living room. Really, it's what we would call nowadays a day bed. And Alice Corbin spent a great deal of time lounging on this day bed. So those are important pieces of furniture. Towards the end of the 30s, Henderson finally completed the murals for the federal building, the federal courthouse building. And if you've never been there, I would encourage you to go and take a look at this. There are 6 murals. 3 of the murals were completed in 1933 as part of the WPA program. The WPA program, however, went away after, I think, 1933. And so while he was paid for the murals, they sat in his studio and never came out. Later on, 4 or 5 years later, one of or another official from the government saw these 2 murals in place, and so Henderson was tasked with completing the last 4 of the murals. Originally, Gerald Cassidy and Sheldon Parsons were supposed to each paint 2 of these murals. Sheldon Parsons, of course, was too infirm at the time, and poor Gerald Cassidy died from carbon monoxide poisoning in his studio on Canyon Road. One thing I should say, have any of you looked at these murals? Well, I don't know if you noticed, the early murals are quite different from the later murals. The early murals are painted in this vibrant palette that he used for most of his studio painting. The murals completed later in the 30s, at the time that he was about to lose his home on Camino del Monte Sol, the palette changes pretty dramatically. It's much more muted. There are a lot more dark purples and blues, and it's just interesting to think that this must have reflected his feelings at the time. So let's talk a little bit about furniture. This is, of course, the Henderson dining room table, and he built this for Alice Corbin, and all the neighbors and his friends in Santa Fe seemed to love it. And so because of this, he started making furniture along with designing homes through his architectural studio. This is a side chair, and you can see it's a pretty straightforward coachety style chair. In fact, it has a coachety style carve here on this apron and this upper rail. The back of the chair is a bit different from what you might see in a coachety chair, but nevertheless, it's pretty much a vernacular New Mexico chair. The dining room table, you can't see it very well in this picture, but it's sort of a standard trestle type of table with 2 pedestals and a stretcher in between. And you can see how thick he made the top, and all of his tables are pretty much like that. We saw this chair in his living room. This is a little Spanish style chair that he created. And the carve on the surface of the chair is indeed very Spanish looking. But if you look at the spindles are not turned on a lathe. They're actually hand carved. And I believe that this chair was based on a real Spanish chair that was in the laboratory director's home that's now Mosca. Or I guess it's not Mosca anymore, is it? Spanish, whatever it's called now. So these are drawings that I believe he completed while he was talking to Elizabeth White about a tea room in the Santa Plaza. So he'd sit there with a patron or a client and sketch these drawings for different chairs that they might be interested in. And I just think it's an amazing drawing. He created a bunch of different pieces of furniture. I suspect that he made several hundred overall. This included chairs, dining room sets, a number of different types of tables, chests. This is his design for a side chair, a dining room side chair. And indeed, these are the basic 2 chairs that he used over and over again. He might change the upper rail or change the design of the front apron of the chair. But basically, these are the 2 styles that he used. There was a lower and a higher, and that's the way they differed from one another. I want you to remember this because go back, you can't remember it too well. This is a drawing for the back of the lounge chair, the Edwin Brooks lounge chair, and we'll see that. We saw it in the Edwin Brooks, actually in that bedroom right back there, and we'll see it later in the actual lounge chair. Can you see this? This is over here on the right You can see a lady's head with a tablita, and he ends up using the drawing of this tablita to make a base for a table here. And so he was constantly looking at Pueblo designs and trying to figure out how he could use them in his furniture. There are two things I think that are most unique about Henderson furniture. First of all, they were built in a fashion that the actual structure or morphology of the furniture is not based on either New Mexico vernacular or Spanish vernacular designs, but on his own style. They almost all had this ornate adzing on the surface of the furniture. And then the other thing, and perhaps the most unique about his furniture, is the use of different carves on the surface of the furniture. And you can see here, he did it other places as well. Basically, there are two different styles of carving, the Spanish floral and the Pueblo geometric. The Spanish floral, I believe, was based on designs that were on shawls that Hispanic women were still wearing in Santa Fe at the time. There are some paintings of women with these shawls on that he created that look exactly like the carves that he created. And then the second one was the Pueblo geometric, which is an asymmetrically balanced design that incorporated Native American geometric elements. So here is a side chair, and you can see this is his Spanish floral design. One of the things that you notice about the design of these panels is that if you draw a line down the center, they are mirror images of one another. It's not really an isomer, though, is it? No. Okay. No. Okay. So this is the number one chair that we looked at earlier, and he would change things. He would change the upper portion of the chair, this upper rail. He might put a different border to the apron. He frequently, with the floral designs, used a rope carve on the front legs. This is the Edwin Brooks lounge chair. And you'll remember from that drawing I showed you, this is the upper panel that he drew, and this is the lower panel. And then he used a third different design here on the apron around the base. So besides being really attractive, I think you can see his passion about dynamic symmetry. Once again, this ratio is that 1.6. And if you look at this and line it up, that's the point between the 1 over here and the 0.6 over here. So he's balanced this image using the golden mean. Here are shop drawings of different styles of the lounge chair. I wanted to show this because this is the Edwin Brooks dining room set, and it's massive. I have no idea where it would have sat in this home, but it was apparently built for it. You have these two large tall back end chairs, 6 side chairs, and then a trestle style dining room table. Here we can see better the dining room table itself. The pedestal has 2 rope carves. Oops, go back. 2 rope carves, and then this little rectangular section in between. And one of the prettiest elements I think that Henderson used was a cloud lift design on the stretcher of his tables. And here we'll see it better later on. This is the side chair for the Edwin Brooks dining room set. And here you can see the shop drawing for the tall back chair. And what I'd like to read is at the bottom, there's a note. It says, outline of Eddie's high back dining room chairs, 2 required. And then he has a note that he's written to Gregorio Gabaldon. It says, pattern on small chairs reversed. Should this be done on these also? So he's asking Gregorio, should they flip the carve on the panels of these high back chairs? Here's the shop drawing of the pedestal for the dining room table. I can't remember exactly, but I'm pretty sure this is actually the Henderson House armchair that you saw in the living room earlier. And if it's made in the Spanish floral style. So the rail in this one, the upper rail, if you look at it, is arched. and he's put carving on the lower apron, and of course a rope carve on the front legs. This is called the Carter Harrison coffee table, or he called it a low table. He initially created this table for Carter Harrison, who was the mayor of Chicago and a good friend of Henderson. He was also a patron of Henderson. And you can see that he's used a Pueblo geometric style of carving. This is obviously a cloud design and a rainfall design here. And then right smack dab in the center of it is the Henderson Rose. This was a large side table that was owned by Mark Zaplin, and it's really heavy because I helped carry it out on the portal to take the photographs, so it was really heavy. What should we say about it? He always used commercial hardware whenever he could. Here you can see commercial hinges. And if you look at these little square handles, those are actually commercial handles that he purchased, and then he recarved them to look and be compatible with his rectilinear rose design. A chest of drawers, which is heavily, deeply carved with the Spanish floral design. One of the things that he typically did was to extend the pegs that held the joinery in place above the surface of the wood, which is sort of an arts and crafts artifice. This is a lovely little side table, and you can see the cloud lift of the lower stretcher of the table, and I think it's just beautiful. You can see on this upper stretcher that he sort of mimicked this cloud design, but not quite the same, but it's enough to be in sympathy with what he's done below. Henderson always considered himself to be a modernist painter. He did not consider himself to be a traditional painter like the other people in Santa Fe at the time. He always thought he was right on the cutting edge, and you can see that this is a pretty cubist design that he's created here for this lamp, and here's the finished product. As an aside, when the Armory show traveled to Chicago, and I think it was in 1914, something like that, Henderson created the designs for a party that was held to celebrate the opening of the exhibition. And there's this great picture of Nordfelt and Henderson all dressed up for this party that was based on Cubism. So I thought I'd show you, he created a number of suites of furniture for various people, and he did so for this couple, Penelope and Cornelius Brown. It's a bit of a sad story, but Cornelius was a very successful man, a businessman in St. Louis, and they built this Mediterranean-style home in St. Louis, and they hired Henderson to create the furniture for the interior. And here's the bill of sale that he sent them as he shipped the furniture. And you can see it consisted of about 14 pieces, the large carved table, 8 side chairs, 2 end chairs, a lowboy, a Davenport, 2 banquitos, and a carved serving table. Including shipping, it came to less than $1,400. And he's also included this little note at the bottom. It says, "My dear Mr. Brown, I hope the furniture arrived in good shape and looks good to you. The waxing will probably have to be rubbed up after the dust of shipment. Good luck on your new home. Sincerely yours, William P. Henderson." Well, if we look at the date, it's June 15th, 1929. So that's 4 months before October of 1929. The Browns moved into their home, and within several months of moving in, poor Cornelius died of a heart attack, which is almost certainly brought on by the stress of the Depression. Penelope was so distraught that she couldn't stay in the house, so she sold the house, moved to San Diego. And the interesting thing is she kept all of this Henderson furniture, and it passed through the family. It was finally sold a few years ago by Nat Owings. So this is quite a dining room set. I'm not sure how long it is. I guess I should have looked that up, but it's big. It has these 2 massive end chairs, 8 side chairs, and once again, like the Edwin Brooks table, it's a trestle style table. here you can see one of the pedestals and the ornate carving that's involved with the production of it. It has, of course, the typical Henderson roses. There's two types of these roses. One of them is the more rectilinear like this, and the other is more rounded like this one. And he uses them, interchanges them, willy-nilly. So, and you can see also on this stretcher, he's used the cloud lift design, which I'm sure he borrowed from the Green brothers. Here's a side chair and the carve on the side chair. And this stuff all meant something to Henderson. I know that this is supposed to be a rainbow and this is supposed to be a rainbow, and he's used the rose design, I believe, to act as a stand-in for the sun. But all this meant something to him at the time. And then these massive in chairs, and then a small side table that is almost exactly, or just a smaller version of the dining room table. A little sideboard. And two of my favorite things, the little stools or banquitos. And if you look at the top of these, they have, of course, a Henderson rose, but two of the petals have been perforated so it passes through the top. And they're really, I think, very lovely. This may be the most beautiful part of the suite, however. This is the Davenport, and you can see it looks an awful lot like the Henderson's daybed. It's a little bit smaller, and I think it has a more beautiful carve on it. A diagonal view. And then, of course, the hand adzi. I have pictures of more furniture. I don't know if you want me to go on and show you a few more pieces or whether we should stop now and answer questions. Yes, he used all milled lumber that he purchased from Santa Fe, whatever. What's that?
From the mill?
Yeah, he might have purchased it directly from the mill. But so he took the milled furniture, he cut it into the various components of the furniture. Then they adds the surface and carved the panels. Then he joined them without nails or screws and held everything in place with oak pegs. And then he stained most of them with an umber color, sort of a medium brown color. And then he waxed them. He didn't varnish any of them. He used a wax that was his own formula. And it looked a bit like plastic. And you can sort of see this in some of the woodwork here. Any other questions, or you want me to show?
Did he dry the wood out?
I think no. Maybe it just sat there in his shop, but I don't think he did anything special to dry it out.
Did people actually put pillows in those uncomfortable chairs?
Yeah, because we did that. So, otherwise, you can't sit on it. It's really hard. Should I show just a couple? Okay, so this is a bed. This is a double bed. He made a bunch of beds, and I think this is one of the most pretty. Here's the headboard with the rope carves over on the side. And I mean, it's just hard. This has nothing to do with New Mexico vernacular furniture. This is all Henderson. The box of the bed is carved all the way around, a spiral finial. And if you look, he must have just been as obsessive as can be, because you can see that he's used this diagonal adzing in areas that won't show. So this is, he called this a tall boy. Oftentimes the two components came apart, but in this one it's actually all one piece. I didn't think this was real the first time I saw it, but I went back and looked at some of the papers at the Archives of American Art, and sure enough, the drawings for this table are there. He carved everything. Every surface is pretty much ornamented. Though it's a Spanish floral design. He didn't very often carve this lower apron on his side tables.
Did he have his workers do the carving too?
Yeah, typically what he did, he did the designs, and then he used a transfer paper So he outlined the designs, and then he used little pins to draw it onto the paper. And he did the initial carve himself, and then he had the people in the shop go ahead and do it as well. And I'll tell you, the best carver was actually Gregorio. There are a couple of pieces in the Museum of New Mexico that he made after the Pueblo-Spanish building company was long gone. That were obviously sort of like Henderson, but not quite. Here's a little what he called the low table, a sideboard, and it's obviously meant to match the previous piece. And the great adzine. And finally, this is it. This is the tool. This is a draw knife. So when they say that it's adze, you think of from someone going like this with some sort of a hatchet. But actually, what they used is a draw knife. You hold the draw knife in both hands, and you pull it towards you across the grain of the wood. So that's it.